will begin this class today with this, the other parameters that are important for vegetative growth. So what we started, what we have talked so far about this soil organic matter. Now we'll come to soil depth. There is another important parameter, the soil depth. The soil depth serves, in two ways. The importance of soil depth, importance as we can see for this soil depth. The first of all, that soil depth ensures up to which the plant roots will spread in the soil, and also more importantly, say this, it also will imply the level of oxygen available for the plant roots, the water retention and absorbing capacity. Water retention and absorption capacity depends on the soil depth, and this depends on the texture and structure of the soil. So the water retention and absorbing capacity depends on the soil depth, and this depends on the texture, and this whole retention and absorbing capacity, this depends on the texture and structure of the soil. So this is about soil depth. We will not discuss much about this. In fact, in the next, when we are discussing soil air, we will be able to understand more on this. So this is the soil depth, that is important for the requirement of soil for vegetative growth. So here, this next is soil air. Interestingly, generally for a poorly drained silty loam, you remember the constituents of the loam, 60%, 20%, 20% that we have done. So here, if it is the silt, the percentage of silt is more, say about 25% or 30% like that, then we will call this as silty loam. So this silty loam is a poorly drained silty loam. Generally for poorly drained silty loam, having higher silt percentage we just observe this, the sample at soil depth, percentage of composition, percentage composition of extracted air, percentage composition of extracted air. Generally in winter and winter, if you see carbon dioxide and oxygen, and say in summer we just see CO2 and oxygen. You see this the concentration at different levels. You just see this soil depth in centimeter. This is just an example case. This is just an example case to illustrate, how at different depths of soil, the typical concentration of air, the gaseous concentration of in the air, how it actually varies. This one is 152. See this one is 1.2 or 19.4. You can see this 11.6, 3.5, 0.7, 2.4. So you can see this one is going down. This one is going down. On the other hand, 2.4, 6.6, 9.6 and 10.4. So this one is going up. So this is with depth it was going up, with depth this one is going down. So similarly, the condition would be somewhat better in summer, but not to say that this one is, the trend remains the same. 19.8, 19.1, 17.5, 14.5 and 12.4.
So in the first case, the percentage of oxygen increased after 120 centimeters.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is an experimental case. Here, at least 0.7. This one is a experimental case. Maybe somewhere it has got. So mostly the trend is towards decreasing. Here also you can see mostly the trend is towards decreasing, but decreasing at a lower rate. This is decreasing at a higher rate. So this is just to suggest how the soil parameters actually behave. The concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the soil at different depths are available. This is just an illustrative case. It's an illustrative case. So here this one is extremely important. As you can see, soil air is very important for the retention of this, or for retention of particularly for the plant root respiration. You can see this if this oxygen continuously go down. So as a result of this, generally if you generally think of here, it's about most of the plants reach their plant roots at about this depth, except for very large plants. Their plant roots should be almost here, almost at this level. So they don't go further down than this. Okay. Now this is about the soil air. Mostly the concentrate composition of the soil air and other things are also of great importance, but we will not find time to discuss them. This is just to illustrate what we can expect in the soil in terms of the gaseous percentages. So the next important thing is, this mineral components. Mineral components and nutrients. See this mineral components in this, first of all, to tie with these mineral components, these are the primary minerals, This is how to identify them in the soil is those from the parent material that are resistant to weathering, present mainly in the sand and silt fractions. You see what is to identify this parent material that are resistant to weathering. So resistant to oxidation, mostly primarily oxidation, present mainly in the sand and silt fractions. They generally do not get weathered, they remain in the soil. But there are secondary minerals which are essentially weathered products. These secondary minerals, as I have said, the plants cannot take anything in the form of solid. It has to be in the dissolved state. So, and this is what the products of chemical weathering. Products of chemical weathering present in the clay, fraction. They include iron, aluminium, and manganese, collectively known as clay minerals. So you can see these primary minerals that we generally discussed, as we have said, those from the parent material that are resistant to weathering. This is what is that would remain after the weathering in the soil. This is the fraction which would not be soluble, which would not dissolve into water. These would remain as it is in the sand and silt fractions. Secondary minerals, the products of chemical weathering present in the clay fraction, they include aluminum silicates and hydrated oxides. This is very important. These hydrated oxides are basically the food or the nutrients for the plants. They are basically the nutrients which are used by the plants for growth. Iron, aluminum, manganese, collectively known as clay minerals. So if you just observe this clay minerals of this, say the most common fraction, most common mineral in sand and silt fractions mineral in sand and silt fraction is quartz. Quartz, which we generally know as SiO2. In weathered soils, we will find in the weathered soils we will find mica and feldspars. Mica and feldspars. This is also strongly weathered micas. In partially weathered soils, we will find mica and feldspar. In non-weathered soil, we will find ilmenite, zircon, and hematite. Okay. In non-weathered soil, we will find ilmenite, zircon, hematite. So this gives you an idea about the composition of the soil. So what we are finding mostly is, say silica is the most common is as the quartz fractions that we are getting. We would also get mica, we would also get feldspar. In non-weathered soil, mostly the soil which is not weathered, we will find mostly the substances like, say, minerals like ilmenite, zircon, and hematite. So this forms basically the most of the minerals that we can expect, in the soil. The minerals, another very important thing that is of great use So here, this is the minerals in the clay fraction. The minerals in the clay fraction impart chemical and physical properties. Chemical and physical properties. For example, absorbing adsorbing cations, anions, and pesticides. Right. So you can see this, the clay fraction impart chemical and physical properties, for example. So here this one is all important. Most of the kind, the sand and silt generally provide a physical property for the soil. Sand and silt provide the physical property of the soil. Say, the soil strength, soil other physical density, all these things are physical properties, are generally governed by the sand and silt. But the clay is actually the particle which helps in the adsorbing of cations, anion, and pesticides. This is what is the most important part of the soil. Where the soil would be able to use these anions, cations for its growth. Okay. Now, having to say all this, there are different kinds of characteristics. I will not go into the detail of that. So this is about from that, the nutrients. The plants must have about 20 nutrients, different nutrients to grow. So not all plants use all these elements, but each of these elements have been found at least. See, what it means is that all 20 elements, there are 20 different nutrients plant need to go, but all plants should not need all these 20. Say there would be some plants which would require 15 of them, some other plants should require another 15 of them, out of which say 10 or 12 would be common and 8 would be uncommon. So together it would be 20. So it's like this. But each of these elements have been found at least for at least essential for one plant. Okay, at least essentially found all this. Ninety-five percent time, 95% cases deal with 15 of these 20 elements. 15 of these 20 elements. Of these 20 elements, out of which the following six are of great importance. This is the most important one are the nitrogen, then phosphorus, potassium, NPK that we know, sulfur, calcium, this is most important. These are the most important things. These are most important. Apart from that, we would require, say, zinc, copper, manganese, molybdenum, boron, and other things like carbon and hydrogen. That the carbon, hydrogen, it is a separate league altogether. We would not, it says altogether these are to say that is important is superfluous, because these are mostly the plants are made of, the carbon and hydrogen. So apart from that, so that's mostly apart from that we have carbon, oxygen and hydrogen that we deal with separately. So this is what you can finally mostly the important elements that you can see. This 6 here and 5 and 14, then maybe one or one maybe okay, we have missed one, that is iron. So here you can see this makes the, so these are most important, this is critically important, these are desirable and essential. Okay, most important, critically important is desirable and essential. So this is all these are supposed to be provided. All these are to be supposed to be provided in the plant. So here you can see this. Say this work mostly for this fertilizers that we use. We say that it is given a number NPK. Okay, this is NPK is nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. These three forms the most important element in any fertilizer, in mostly inorganic fertilizer. So here these are the important aspects which you should find out about the soil, how much of the soil, what is the concentration of these substances in the soil, so that the plant can take them easily, and they should be available in a form of in the dissolved fractions. They should be in the form of dissolved material. So here, so this should form the most of this essential elements. If you are provided to the plant would be in a position to survive. So here, apart from this, there are few other things that I would like to discuss here. One is this organic compounds. I mean, this organic compounds in soil. Soil organic matter we have discussed, but in the part is that we have discussed the importance. Here I would just briefly deal about what are all these organic compounds that we see, that we found in the soil. Organic compounds that we find in the soil. The soil organic matter, is composed of, generally we have two fractions. We generally call this as a humus, and is called light fraction. Visible structure, soil organic matter, humus and light fraction, visible structure. What is, let me give you an example, small example here. If you just see, you have all seen that, a particularly, say, cow dung, okay, if you observe the cow dung, after a rain or things like that, you would observe that there are some fractions which are visible, the structures are visible, you can find out the cellulose in them. Okay, they are, these are solid fractions, these are solid fractions, these are solid fractions for which the structure is available. Other than that, there is a liquid fraction which is generally in the liquid form. You cannot see much of the structure there, because these are already in the form of semi mixture, or in the dissolved state they remain. So this particularly is whenever we can see the visible structures, mostly the light fraction, the visible structure that you can see, this together forms the humus. A large part of that is humus. So one light fraction where the structure is visible, and another case the structure is not visible. So in a semi-liquid form, this humus, and this humus is essentially composed of, if we can make this a fulvic acid, then you find humic acid, and you find humin, So effect, particularly have been this humus. This whole humus is basically, this humus is known as, these humus are essentially natural polysaccharides. Natural polysaccharides. These are mostly natural polysaccharides. This is saccharines. You have heard of the saccharines, which are basically a highly bonded carbon, hydrogen, or oxygen compound. Mostly this is basically an organic compound. This natural polysaccharides the polysaccharides can be synthetic also. That today we manufacture a number of polysaccharides, like the polysaccharide which is used for, say, as a substitute for sugar for most of the people. For diabetic people they use polysaccharides. So these are polysaccharides, means number of bonding of different polysaccharides. It's not a single atom molecular structure of an saccharide. There are a number of molecular structure together. These are called polysaccharides. That saccharines are mostly carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen compounds. In a highly bonded organic compounds, there may be some other substances also, some other elements also connected with that. So these are the natural polysaccharides. So mostly, if we just identify what humus is, you have to identify them as, say, something like, generally the food we identify as, in the form of carbohydrate or in the form of fat or things like that. So humus is essentially a polysaccharide. Structurally is a polysaccharide. Is composed of these three acids, fulvic acid, humic acid, and humic acid. So this is, remember one thing, this is not a single acid. Okay, this is a family of acids. All these are basically family of acids. These are all family of acids. There are fulvic acid, there may be a different number of species is available in fulvic acid. Number of species may be available in humic acid itself. This is just a family of a certain class of acids. These are families of certain kind of acids. So here, if we just observe, so this is what, if we are just for our purpose, for engineering purpose, what is the concentration, general constituent of an organic Suppose if you are going to use a organic fertilizer in the soil, so you must know a little bit about what it contains, what purpose it would serve. So here in this case, this is the soil organic matter serves in that matter itself. So here if you can just see that average chemical composition, you see here this average chemical composition. I will just make this somewhat detailed because of a component humic acid, fulvic acid, percentage, okay, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, COOH as a radical, phenolic OH. So here in humic acid, this is 56, 36, 4.7, 3.2, 0.8, 3.6 and 3.9, whereas this one is fulvic acid. Here you can see is 46, 45, 54, 5.4, 2.1, 1.9, 1.9, 8.2. Just to give an idea, about the chemical composition of this acid. So here you can see this, the two important differences that you can see. Here is the carbon is more, carbon is relatively less here, whereas this oxygen is more here, oxygen is less here. So here this just to talks about the compositional difference, say about the higher this is both are organic compounds, but these are most saturated or more bonded with carbon, these are less bonded with carbon. So this makes the difference. So here all you can see is this particularly, okay, and so this is what is the mostly the soil humic substances. So if you are interested, if you are just going to give it, depending on what the soil suffers from, you should be able to use them. You should be able to know from this soil organic matter, which are the substances you are supposed to provide. You are supposed to provide to the soil for the soil to be good for vegetative growth. Yes. So this is what is about this soil organic compounds. There are many more details to be followed here, but we will not go into that. Apart from that, other important parts that I would always ask you to know is this. Other important constituents is, say, other than this organic matter, is the nitrogen that you know already. This is specifically nitrogen should be mentioned, and pertaining to this nitrogen fixing plants, say, then is this fertilizer. There is another important thing, that is fertilizer. We would fertilizer at one level, initially before the plant has stabilized, the fertilizers are important. So the fertilizers fertilizers that are important for soil growth are the nitrogen fertilizers, are, say, ammonium in the form of ammonium NH4 nitrate okay. So this here, the ammonium in the form of nitrogen fertilizers, these fertilizers may contain from 82% to 10% of nitrogen. In the fertilizer. So depending on the requirement of nitrogen, this should be taken. So it is depending on this is phosphorus fertilizers. These phosphorus fertilizers are mostly plants need relatively large amount of phosphorus. What amount of availability of phosphorus is very low in disturbed soil. So it has to be supplemented by phosphorus fertilizer. So generally the typical type of these phosphates that we use, the fertilizers, they mostly say this is phosphorus percentage, rock phosphate, will be having 12 to 18%, normal superphosphate would be about 9%, and this ammonium phosphate would be about 18%. So you see, so there are many more, I should not have to discuss all this. See here, one very important thing is, you have heard of this, if you just follow any kind of, if you just next time you see the pack of fertilizer, in a pack of fertilizer, you see when it is written superphosphate, normal superphosphate. So the percentage of phosphorus, so this is percentage of phosphorus, say here again rock phosphate 12 or 18%, ammonium phosphate, whenever is available, apart with with other considerations, these are mostly these are also used, these are also required, and they would also require mostly solubility, water soluble, water solubility, the mostly the rock phosphates are not soluble in water except (85% water solubility). 85%, they generally also says ammonium phosphate would be about 92%. So whatever this, mostly these substances, you can see this would be dissolved quantity that would be available of the total mass would be about 92%. Dissolved, this one is the rock phosphates. So the rock phosphates require a certain kind of, not in all cases, if they are only when they are weathered, they would be useful for the plants, because till that time it would not be soluble. Okay. So this is what is this phosphorus. Another is the potassium. Just a few lines on this. Potassium fertilizer. Potassium fertilizer. This is third of this deficient is potassium is also, apart from this nitrogen, phosphorus, and apart from that, potassium is also a critically important element for the plant growth. So you can see this, some of this, say fertilizers, the standard fertilizers that we use, this standard, they are this, you can just write that they are naturally available at about 1 to 10% in the soil. They are the standard. Otherwise, the fertilizers that are used, this is ammonium nitrate, limestone, where the nitrogen would be 30, where we are combiningly using this calcium, magnesium, and sulfur is 7.3, 4.4, and 0.4, whereas this another very important, the superphosphates. The superphosphates, on the other hand, would be having, say, if phosphorus should be here, this is the superphosphate should be 18 to 20, 0.2, 0.2, this is 0. This is 20, 0.2, and 12.4, 12 to 14. So this is how they should be available. So you can see this, all this phosphorus is being supplied by the superphosphates that you can observe here, and alright, and so here this is how these other substances are available. These are magnesium, calcium and things like that. So all this just to suggest, so any kind of fertilizers that we use, depends, would like to observe the amount of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium that would be available for the plants. So this is, apart from that, there is one thing is that we just soil acidity, unless weathered, you can also write that unless weathered or contaminated, soil acidity known in terms of soil fraction dissolved in water, unless weathered or contaminated soil acidity, soil acidity known in terms of soil fraction dissolved in water is generally between 6.8 to 7.2 pH. So most of the soil, and the soil has a natural tendency, if the soil is generally left as it is, the soil has a natural tendency to reach towards the neutral pH. The soil would also have, this is 6.8, would remain say slightly alkaline or slightly acidic, they might remain in the most of the cases. This is the zone they vary because of different decomposable substances in the soil. Say particularly if in the summertime, say in the winter, the soil pH would be mostly towards alkaline. But in the summertime, when the oxidation increases in the soil acidity would increase, and there will be buffers also to control that. But you will observe that soil acidity is increasing, and it might reach to about say 6.8 or so, slightly acidic. So this is how the soil acidity actually differs. But this soil acidity has a great role, as an important role for plant growth. So we will discuss about that in the next class.